Welcome back to Math 103. This is video number 8 on fair distribution. The method of markers is our second method for carrying out fair distributions of discrete goods. The difference between them in practice is that the method of sealed bids is useful for distributing a small number of large items, relatively large items, and the method of markers is useful for distributing a large number of small items. Again, this is easier to understand if it's illustrated with an example. So our four characters are going to be Ed, Faith, Greg, and Hannah, and they have to carry out a fair distribution of the following items: 4 oranges, 4 pears, and 4 apples. Now, are these really discrete items? Perhaps they're doing this prior to a trip. They don't wish to cut any of the individual pieces of fruit, so each piece of fruit will be given whole to one player. That means that this is a job for a fair distribution method rather than a fair division method. So their individual preferences are as follows. Ed likes all types of fruit equally. Faith likes only oranges and pears, not apples. Greg likes oranges twice as much as pears and likes pears and apples equally. Hannah likes pears 1.5 times as much as apples. She's very precise, but she dislikes oranges completely. With this given information, we can set up a point scheme similar to what we've done for other types of division problems. But before we get there, there is one other aspect which is truly essential here, and that is that someone arranges the items in a row in a particular order. This is crucial to how the method works. Any order is acceptable, but we need the items to be in one particular order to carry out the method. So behold, this is the order in which somebody arranges the items. O for orange, P for pear, A for apple. Just as we did in the method of sealed bids, we start out analyzing each player's valuation of the goods. We create a point system to account for the relative preferences that each player has for the different kinds of fruit. This kind of a chart might seem reminiscent of the charts we looked at in the previous chapter to analyze timeshare situations. That's not such an accident. This is actually analogous. What we're going to do here is analogous to the thought process we used in the previous chapter, but this is a crucial distinction. We are talking about fair distribution here, not fair division. Each orange will go whole to one person. We're not going to be cutting any oranges down the middle. If you look this chart over, you'll see that it does indeed correctly reflect the player's stated preferences. So Ed was the one who liked each kind of fruit equally. Faith was the one who didn't like apples, but she did like oranges and pears equally. So let each of them count for 1 faith point, and let each apple count for 0 faith points. Greg was the one who liked oranges twice as much as pears or apples. So each pear or apple is 1 Greg point, and each orange is worth 2 Greg points. And finally, Hannah was the one who liked pears 1.5 times more than apples. So let apples be worth 1 Hannah point and pears 1.5 Hannah points. But she also didn't like oranges at all. So each orange is worth 0 Hannah points. Terrific. So Ed is looking at 12 Ed points worth of fruit. His minimum fair share amount is 3 Ed points. Okay, because 12 divided by 4 is 3, we have to divide by 4 here because there are 4 players. Each player is entitled to at least 1/4 of the total value. Similarly, Faith has a minimum fair share amount of 2 Faith points. For Greg, 16 total divided by 4 equals 4 Greg points. And for Hannah, her minimum fair share amount is 2.5 Hannah points. So you can have half points. Why not? Okay, you just can't cut pieces of fruit in half. If you really don't like the idea of having half points, you could just take these numbers and double them. Right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. You could set up Hannah's point system so that a pear is worth 3 Hannah points, and an apple is worth 2 Hannah points, an orange would still be worth 0 Hannah points, and you would still have the same relative proportions between the different items, which is all that really matters. So how do we apply the actual method? The method of markers has three stages, namely, placement of the markers, allocation of minimum fair shares, and distribution of leftovers. Alright, so let's see how those work in turn. To place the markers, there are 4 players, so each one has to mark off 4 equally valuable shares. This is very similar to what the divider does in the lone divider method, except that now we're going to have each player do this separately. So each share is going to be worth exactly 1/4 of the value of all the goods. Each player is obligated to mark off 4 equally valuable shares. So each of those 4 equally valuable shares is worth 1/4 of the total value, and therefore is a minimum fair share. Right? When you have 4 players, that's what a minimum fair share is. It's worth exactly 1/4 of the total value of all the goods. So in the course of doing this, each player is going to mark off his or her first fair share, second fair share, third fair share, and fourth fair share. To illustrate this, Ed places his markers in the following way. Ed sees 12 Ed points worth of value on the table in front of him, so his minimum fair share is 3 Ed points. What's he going to do? He's going to mark off 4 separate shares, each worth 3 Ed points. He's going to start all the way at the left and count forward 3 Ed points, and then put down a marker. We'll typically call that E1 for Ed's number 1 marker. He proceeds to count forward another 3 Ed points and puts down his second marker, E2. He counts forward another 3 points and puts down his third marker, E3. Okay. Notice that he only needs to put down 3 markers in order to mark off 4 shares. Before going on to the next video, indicate where Faith will place each of her markers. Call them F1, F2, and F3, and try to use the same thought process that we just used to figure out the location of Ed's markers. Now, it doesn't matter that Ed has already placed his markers. Faith will place her markers according to her own point system, marking off 4 equally valuable shares from her point of view. If some of her markers happen to be in the same location as some of Ed's markers, there's nothing wrong with that. You should picture these items arranged along a table, and these markers are small pieces of paper or something that the players can slip in between the pieces of fruit.